Welcome to a deep dive into something you might not even realize you have, your behavioral immune system. Ever recoil at the sight of a cockroach? Or gag at the smell of spoiled milk? That's this amazing system hard at work, trying to keep you safe from all the yucky stuff out there.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. It acts as a sort of psychological shield, but instead of using antibodies, it uses tools like disgust, avoidance, and learning to help us navigate a world full of potential threats.
So instead of directly fighting off those threats, it's more about cleverly steering clear of them.
Exactly. It's like an internal radar honed over thousands of years to be super effective at keeping us healthy.
Okay, so how does it actually work? What's going on in our brains when we encounter something that triggers this ew reaction?
A classic example is the Garcia effect, a famous experiment with rats. Researchers found they quickly learned to associate nausea with food, but not with other stimuli like light or sounds.
So they figured out bad food, avoid, but weren't bothered by other non-threatening things.
Interesting. Does this mean our brains are wired to prioritize avoiding things that could make us sick?
Precisely. It highlights the evolutionary power and specificity of the system.
Makes sense.
And when it comes to that instinctive ick factor, nothing sends a stronger danger signal than the feeling of disgust.
You're right. That visceral ew, gub feeling is almost universal. Is the disgusted facial expression the same across cultures too?
Remarkably, yes.
Yeah.
We all scrunch up our noses in the same way, regardless of where we come from. And research has identified 5 main categories of things that trust disgust in people all over the world.
And I'm curious, what are they?
The first is bodily excretions and body parts, things like vomit or open wounds. Then there's decay and spoiled food, which is pretty self-explanatory. We also have particular living creatures, often insects or rodents. Then there's disgust aimed at certain categories of other people, which can tie into ideas of disease or contamination. And finally, there's disgust related to violations of morality or social norms. That's fascinating. So it's not just about things that are literally gross, but also things that feel wrong on a deeper level.
Yeah.
Does this mean disgust plays a role in shaping our social behaviors too?
Absolutely. All these categories in some way point to potential threats, either physical or social, that our ancestors might have used to avoid getting sick or ostracized from their group.
Okay, so we all have this system, and it's pretty effective. But I've noticed some people seem way more easily grossed out than others. What makes some of us more sensitive to ick than others?
That's where things get really interesting. Disgust sensitivity, meaning how easily something triggers that ew response, is influenced by many factors. One of the biggest is your environment. People in environments with a high risk of pathogens tend to be more disgust sensitive, especially those with the resources to avoid those pathogens.
That makes sense. If you can avoid something gross, you're probably more likely to be bothered by it.
Exactly. But here's a surprising twist. Those who can't avoid pathogens might actually have lower disgust sensitivity.
Wait, really? Wouldn't they be even more careful?
Because if avoiding pathogens is impossible, being disgusted all the time wouldn't actually be helpful for survival.
Ah, I see. So it's about adapting to what works best in your specific situation.
Precisely. This adaptability extends to other factors too, like a person's age.
How so? Does our sensitivity to disgust change as we get older?
It seems so. Disgust sensitivity actually develops during childhood, potentially to allow exposure to beneficial microbes early on. This links back to the hygiene hypothesis, the idea that some exposure to germs is beneficial for developing a robust immune system.
So all those kids eating dirt and playing in the mud might be onto something.
In a way, yes. Then, disgust sensitivity may decline in older adults unless they encounter a drastically new environment.
So it's less about aging itself and more about whether you're encountering new, potentially icky things. That makes sense. What about differences between men and women? Is there any variation in disgust sensitivity based on sex?
Yes, there does seem to be a difference, on average. Women tend to be more sensitive to disgust than men.
Any ideas why that might be?
It likely comes down to the heightened risks associated with infection during pregnancy. A stronger disgust response could be a way to protect both the mother and the developing fetus.
That's fascinating. So disgust sensitivity isn't just about avoiding a stomach bug.
Yeah.
It's tied into some pretty fundamental biological processes. Do hormones play a role in this too?
They very well might. It's a fascinating area of ongoing research. And speaking of things that can influence our disgust sensitivity, even someone's immune system status can come into play.
That makes sense. When I'm feeling under the weather, even the thought of my favorite foods can make me queasy.
Exactly. If your immune system is weakened, Or if you're experiencing nutritional stress, your disgust sensitivity can actually shift in either direction. It might increase to provide extra protection, or it might decrease to ensure you're eating enough to survive.
That's a fascinating paradox. So our bodies are constantly weighing the risks and benefits of being disgusted, fine-tuning the system based on our current needs. It makes you wonder, does being easily disgusted actually lead to better health outcomes?
That's a great question. And it's one that researchers are actively exploring. The research is still limited, but some studies suggest that higher disgust sensitivity might indeed be linked to a lower frequency of infections.
So maybe all that hand sanitizing and cautiousness around germs isn't such a bad thing after all.
It's possible, but as with most things, there can be a downside.
I have a feeling you're about to tell me it's not good to be too disgusted.
You're catching on. Excessive disgust sensitivity, especially in environments that are already very hygienic, could actually backfire. Remember the hygiene hypothesis we talked about? We need some exposure to microbes to build a strong immune system.
Right. So it's about finding that sweet spot, avoiding harmful things, while also not being afraid of everything.
Exactly. And this brings up another important point. Earlier, we talked about disgust playing a role in shaping our social behaviors. Well, researchers are starting to explore how excessive disgust sensitivity might be linked to some modern-day health issues.
This is where it gets really interesting. Tell me more.
Well, think back to how we discussed that a lack of exposure to diverse microbes could potentially hinder the development of a balanced immune response.
So our immune systems need some training from those microbes.
Yeah.
And if they don't get it,
They might overreact to things that aren't actually threats, like pollen or dust mites.
that makes sense. Could this be connected to the rise in allergies and autoimmune disorders?
It's a complex area of study, and there are many contributing factors, but this is one potential avenue researchers are exploring. And it's not just allergies. Some researchers believe that excessive disgust sensitivity might also play a role in conditions like obsessive-compulsive disorder.
OCD.
Really?
I'm not sure I see the connection.
Well, consider the anxiety and hypervigilance that often surround contamination in OCD. Some researchers believe this could be linked to an overactive behavioral immune system.
So it's like the system is stuck in overdrive, constantly on high alert for threats,
Yeah.
even when there's no real danger.
Exactly. This can lead to excessive hand-washing, cleaning rituals, and a fear of germs that significantly disrupts daily life.
Wow. That's a pretty profound thought. Something that evolved to protect us. Might actually be contributing to these modern-day struggles. It seems like our increasingly sanitized world might be interfering with the natural balance of our behavioral immune systems.
It's a fascinating area of research, and it highlights how understanding these underlying systems can give us a new perspective on both our individual experiences and broader societal trends.
Absolutely. This deep dive is really making me reconsider my own reactions and behaviors.
That's the power of knowledge.
Right.
By understanding our behavioral immune system, we can become more aware of our reactions and make more informed choices about our health and well-being.
Speaking of informed choices,
Yeah.
is there anything we can do with this knowledge? Besides trying not to freak out about every little speck of dust, of course.
That's a great question. Well, we don't have all the answers yet. Simply being aware of the behavioral immune system is a good starting point. It allows us to be more mindful of our reactions and question whether our fear of certain things is truly warranted.
So a little introspection goes a long way.
Exactly. And remember, it's about finding that balance we've been talking about. Exposing ourselves to some microbes is important for building immunity, but we also want to take reasonable precautions to avoid harmful pathogens.
Like washing our hands regularly.
Mhm.
But maybe not bleaching every surface in sight.
Precisely. And when we do experience intense feelings of disgust, it can be helpful to recognize them as a product of this ancient system that's trying to protect us. It's not that we're being irrational or overreacting. Our brains are just doing what they've done for millennia, trying to keep us safe.
That's a really reassuring way to think about it. It's not about being a germaphobe. It's about understanding where these feelings come from.
Exactly. And with that understanding, we can start to find ways to manage those feelings and live more balanced, healthy lives.
That's such a valuable takeaway. This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. I feel like I'm seeing my own behaviors and even the world around me in a whole new light.
That's the beauty of understanding these underlying systems. It gives us a new lens through which to view our experiences and make more informed choices.
I completely agree. This has been a fascinating exploration of the behavioral immune system. It's amazing to think that something so deeply ingrained in our biology continues to shape our behaviors and even our health in the modern world.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of our biology, our psychology, and our environment.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap things up?
I think the biggest takeaway is to pay attention to your disgust reactions. Don't just dismiss them as silly or irrational. They're actually valuable signals from a powerful system that's evolved over millennia to keep you safe.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder. It's like listening to your gut. Or maybe your disgust response is more accurate. So we've covered a lot of ground today. From understanding what the behavioral immune system is, to exploring how it impacts our health and behavior in surprising ways.
As we wrap up, I'm curious, is there anything else about how adaptable the system is that we haven't touched on yet? Let me think. We haven't yet talked about how our disgust sensitivity can fluctuate based on what's happening inside our body.
Oh, right. You mentioned earlier that when we're sick or stressed, our disgust levels can go a bit haywire.
Exactly. Imagine your body is already fighting off an infection. Your immune system is working overtime, so it wants to avoid any additional threats.
So it cranks up the disgust response to avoid anything that could make things worse.
Precisely. But here's the interesting part. If you're experiencing nutritional stress, your body might actually lower your disgust sensitivity.
Wait, really? Why would it do that?
Think about it. If you're not getting enough calories, your body's top priority is to get you fed, even if that means being less picky about what you eat. Survival trumps hygiene in those situations.
Wow, that's incredible. Our bodies have this amazing ability to adapt and prioritize based on what's most important at the moment.
It is pretty remarkable. It's a testament to how evolution has shaped this incredibly complex system. And it highlights the fact that disgust sensitivity isn't fixed. It's constantly changing based on our internal state and the environment around us.
This entire deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I'm seeing myself and the world around me with a fresh perspective.
I'm glad to hear that. That's the power of knowledge and understanding, and I hope this new awareness empowers you to make informed choices about your health and well-being.
Absolutely. It's been a fascinating journey into the world of the behavioral immune system. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's amazing to think that something so deeply ingrained in our biology continues to shape our behaviors and even our health in the modern world. And remember, it's all about finding that balance, protecting yourself without letting fear take over. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.